In this video, I'm going to cover the 4 most important things for you to know when you're making any type of isolate-based oil infusion. So whether you're using CBD, CBG, or CBN, and regardless of the type of oil, all of these steps matter to make sure that you have an incredibly potent and accurate and successful experience, whether you're making a tincture, a topical, or any type of oil for an edible infusion. And the 4 crucial things that you need to know are: first, how to determine your dose; second, what ingredients to select, including the types of cannabinoids; the third is combining your ingredients properly so you get the right dose; and the 4th is the best ways to label and store your infusion. The first thing you have to figure out is how many milligrams of CBD, CBG, or CBN you want per milliliter of oil. And how you figure this out is really simple math. You can follow this equation for any type of powdered base isolate that you're working with. Now, I have 10 grams of CBD isolate, which doesn't really look like a lot, but that means that there are 10 grams times 1,000, 10,000 milligrams of CBD in this small container. Now, I want to make my infusion relatively potent, so I want to have 50 milligrams of CBD per milliliter of oil. The math is very simple. Take 10,000, divide it by 50, and that gives us 200. So what that means is that the final volume of my infusion with all ingredients needs to be exactly 200 milliliters. The type of oil or fat you use for the infusion is completely up to you. Personally, I prefer flavorless oils that hardly have any aroma at all, like MCT oil, but you can also use various vegetable oils or avocado oil if you're looking for something that doesn't have much of a flavor, especially if you're sensitive to MCT oil. Now, if you are looking to use MCT oil, I would highly recommend using C8 MCT, which is a very particular type of medium chain triglyceride that has the least amount of GI distress associated with it. If you want to use any type of saturated fat like tallow, clarified butter, ghee, or coconut oil, that's totally fine. You just have to melt them beforehand so that you can pour exactly the amount of milliliter of liquid instead of working with chunky bits of tallow or coconut oil and things like that. Now, the order in which you add your ingredients into your infusion container really matters. If you're making any infusion that you want to use for recipes, I would not recommend adding any other ingredients because you want it to smell and taste pretty much like nothing so that it doesn't affect the flavor or aroma of your recipe. Now, if you're making a tincture or a topical and you want to add essential oils, terpenes, terpene blends, or even things like stevia to change the flavor, you have to do it before you add your oil. And the reason why is because as you add those ingredients into here, it is going to increase the volume, even if it's just by a tiny little bit. And since we based our math based off of 200 milliliters of oil, we can't simply just pour in 200 milliliters of the oil because the ingredients and the cannabinoids that are in here take up space, they take up volume. So you would actually end up with more than 200 milliliters and your math would not be accurate. So just as a quick recap, you're gonna start with your isolate first, then add any additional ingredients like terpenes or a sweetener, and then you're gonna fill the container to the amount of milliliters you got when you broke down your dose, which was based off of the amount of milligrams and cannabinoids you started with, and then how many milligrams you want per milliliter. As you can see, the CBD isolate is already started to dissolve, but is also being suspended in little chunks in the oil. So grab a whisk or a little hand blender or even a fork, or you could even put this in a ball jar and shake to start mixing together and slowly dissolving the isolate with the oil. Cannabinoids are lipophilic, meaning fat-loving. so they easily dissolve in any type of fat or oil. Now, easily really is going to be dependent on the temperature. So at room temperature, it's going to take about a day for the cannabinoids to fully dissolve into your oil. But if you want to speed up that process, all you have to do is heat your oil up to about 110 degrees, and when you mix it in and give it a stir, you'll see that the cannabinoids will quickly dissolve. And the final part of making sure you have a successful infusion is to label it and store it properly. Now, I'm doing a cold infusion or a room temperature infusion. I'm not heating the oil. I'm simply just going to transfer this into my storage container, tighten the lid, and this allows me to give it a shake every couple of hours so I can make sure that I'm just breaking up any type of CBD isolate that might be stuck together in there. And now we're gonna label the jar of the container, not the lid, because lids can get misplaced or exchanged with other infusions. So make sure that you put your label or tape directly on the jar. And how I label this is really simple. So this is CBD Isolate. I'm gonna put today's date, which is May 16th, the type of infusion oil, which is MCT oil, and now the dose, which is 50 milligrams per milliliter. And as long as you have these basic things listed on your label, you know when you made it, you know what's in it, and you know what your dose is gonna be. For your storage container, you could use something as simple as a clear ball jar, but you gotta make sure that you're storing this in a cool, dark place. Otherwise, if you want something that you can have set out on the counter or in your bathroom, definitely get yourself a trans-opaque or a completely solid glass tincture bottle so that no UV rays can come in and oxidize either your coconut oil or terpenes or cannabinoids or anything else that may be in here. It'll just extend the shelf life. And last but not least, make sure you've got yourself a good Sharpie permanent marker so that your label isn't gonna smudge and you're not gonna have this mystery bottle of who knows what sitting on your counter. All right, at the Future Shop, we have some CBD Isolate, CBG, and CBN. So cannabidiol, cannabigerol, and cannabinol. Now, you can make any type of oil-based infusion following the process that you learned here with all three of these cannabinoids by themselves, or you can create different ratios of them. Regardless of how many or at what ratio of these you decide to mix together, at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you know how many grams by weight you have so that you can then break it down to how many milligrams per milliliter of your oil-based infusion. A lot of people like to keep the ratios really simple, so they'll do, say, 5 grams of CBD isolate, and then they'll do 2.5 grams each of CBN and CBG. So you now have a 2-part CBD to 1 part each of these other cannabinoids, 5 grams, 2.5 and 2.5, another 5, you have 10 grams. So however you go about doing that, you then just take that ratio and look at it per dose. So for simple math, if you have 100 milligrams per milliliter of your final ratio of all of this, and you did a 2 to 1 to 1 ratio, that means that you would have 50 milligrams of the CBD isolate and then 25 each of the CBN and the CBG. So there you have it, folks. There are the 4 most important things you need to do to make sure you have a successful and accurately dosed infusion. I hope you enjoyed this video and it makes your isolate infusions at home a lot easier. Cheers.